Hi, I'm Marjorie King. I'm a curator at the American Federation of Arts and a member of the Association of Art Museum Curators Professional Development Committee. If you'd like to know more about the Association of Art Museum Curators, please go to our website at www.artcurators.org. I'd like to welcome the panelists and the viewers to this webinar on successful collaboration and cooperation between curators and conservators. And this is hosted by the AAMC and the AAMC Foundation. For your information, AAMC webinars are open to both AAMC members and non-members, and they are also accessible on the AAMC website. So let's get started. Cooperation between curators and conservators is mutually beneficial in a range of ways. And for this webinar, we're looking forward to touching on best practices for cooperation, points of view relating to conservation, and practical questions, all of which will regard the synergy possible between curators and conservators. We welcome questions from the audience. You can enter questions in the box on the right of your screen, and you can do that throughout the webinar, and we will go ahead and ask as many questions from the audience as we can. I want to introduce our great panelists. Margo Delidow is an assistant conservator at the Whitney Museum and a member of the Whitney's Replication Committee. Martha Demas is a senior project specialist at the Getty Conservation Institute, and Marcia Reed is chief curator, associate director, and head of special collections and exhibitions at the Getty Research Institute. If you'd like to know a little more about the panelists, once again, you can go to our website and see their bios there. So we're going to get started by talking about each of our panelists' work and interactions that they have with their colleagues, especially curatorial or conservation colleagues. Margo, would you describe what you do, including any special focuses that relate to our topic? And also, please discuss the Whitney Replication Committee and how it works.
Yeah, thank you, Marjorie. I'm Margo Delidow. I'm a sculpture conservator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. I specialize in three-dimensional works of art and work with living and artist estates, making decisions that apply to our works in the collection and on view. I'll be talking today mostly about the Whitney Replication Committee, which was assembled in the spring of 2008. It's an interdisciplinary group that is made up of conservators, curators, registrar, general counsel, rights and reproductions, and director of research resources. It was founded really to address ideas and issues related to the duplications of works in the Whitney's permanent collection. But we also look to related collection works and purposes associated within the museum programming. We meet monthly to discuss issues of replication and things that are associated with matters of refabrication, exhibition copies, and authentication. Intent of the group was really to institute a rigorous and consistent approach for the museum in terms of museum policy and practice, really through a critical review with a precedent within the institution and with an eye towards resolution of current issues.
And I think you were going to show some slides now to illustrate some of the things that you do.
I do. So I am ready to show my screen here. Doing that. And the first work here is a Richard Serra work, and it consists of a flat lead plate that's held in place by the wall, onto the wall with a rolled sheet of lead. And what happened here, it's originally fabricated in 1968. The Whitney's prop work here by Richard Serra could no longer hold its shape, and it began to curl away from the edges. To solve the problem, the Whitney then attached the work mechanically to the wall with Velcro and tape. And I can show my screen again while I speak a little bit more about this piece. So until my webcam starts going again, oh, here we go. Okay, so in 1990, the work started to have metal fatigue, and the pieces again started peeling away from the wall. Richard Serra then replaced that sheet with another one to see if it could solve the problem. Then in 2007, when Richard Serra was having a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the artist himself requested to refabricate the piece with a slightly different alloy to try to deal with the problems of the original artwork by keeping it flat against the wall. Therefore, the Whitney Replication Committee was then formed to figure out, again, amongst curators, conservators, registrars, and our general counsel, how do we deal with artists and artworks when they're changing works? And that's really the birth of the Replication Committee there.
And did you want to show another example at this point, or do you want to wait till later in the discussion?
We'll wait till later for that one.
Okay, sounds good. So for Martha and Marcia, they've worked together on a project in Dunhuang in China. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Martha first and then Marcia, if you would just, again, speak briefly about your individual work, including any special focuses that might relate to our topic. And then hopefully together you can discuss the Dunhuang project in China and at the Getty and show your slides. So Martha, would you begin and just talk about your work?
Sure. So Martha Demas, and I'm a senior project specialist at the Getty Conservation Institute. And I consider myself, my background is archaeology. I'm a conservation professional. I'm not a conservator per se. And we work internationally on projects throughout the world on cultural heritage sites, undertaking a broad spectrum of work on those sites. And one of the places where I've been most involved has been in China, where I've been working since 1996. So that's the project that I will show you some slides on, and once Marcia introduces herself.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. I'm Marcia Reed, and I was a rare books and a prints curator at Getty Research Institute, but have been, I guess, graduated to oversee the 12 curators of our collections. Mostly we do acquisitions and donations coming into the collections, and then the curator's job is to promote those materials or to promote new ideas in art history, and that's what our exhibitions are about. But we jumped into the deep end of the pool when we started to work with the Getty Conservation Institute. One of the fun things about being at the Getty Center is we can move around, work with the museum, work with the Conservation Institute, or collaborate outside and work on exhibitions. When we were working on the Cave Temples of Dunhuang, we weren't working from our collections. We were working with a view to project a more global view of art history, and then to show how important work in conservation, work, as Martha said, with conservation kinds of practices, but also to talk about how those are adapted when you radically shift your culture and your audience. And so that's been a lot of fun to present the idea of bringing replica caves to the Getty and to talk about how they are or they're not works of art, and then to bring people into the galleries and to talk about the fact that those are amazing works of art and they're real, having shown replicated works. And it's a very different kind of thing. I think it's nice to talk about this also with Margo, to juxtapose these different kinds of presenting artwork. We're also working with live artists, but of course we're not working with the artists in the Haitang dynasty. And so it's quite a different thing. And then we did a 3D immersive experience, and that was really to explain Buddhism and the way that Buddhist practice is a different way of viewing art and a different way of being in the presence of artwork. So that's a very short summary of this very, very challenging exhibition that we did. We just won an award today. We won the Association of American Publishers Award for the catalog. So
that's great.
That was a big relief, actually. You sort of know from audience reaction to exhibitions or just to gallery installations how it's going, but then sometimes you don't really know, and so it's very interesting to get feedback.
So do you two want to start showing some of the images and talking about the project in more depth, both in China and at the Getty?
Sure. I'm ready to show those. I will put those on right now. Okay, can you see them?
Not yet.
I think maybe we're waiting for Lucy to get them up there.
It feels like we're sort of pushing them, hoping, giving moral support to their appearance.
Okay, just let me know when they're visible.
Did you see the note to click the share your screen button?
Not yet.
Martha?
Yeah. No, that's not the one.
Oh, we had it for a second there.
I'm just wondering if there's too much moisture in California. Here we go.
There we go.
Okay, now everybody can see?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so this is, briefly, this is a map of China, and what I want to point out is the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road, which you can see with this yellow line that takes you basically from Xi'an through the Heshi corridor to Dunhuang, which is the site we're going to talk about right here, the town of Dunhuang here, and the site of the Magao Grottos right here, not far from it. And the Silk Road at this point splits off and goes around the Taklamakan Desert to the north and the south, and then over the mountains and into Central Asia, and eventually to the Mediterranean. So this is basically just the geographic area which we're talking about. This here is the site, an aerial view of the site of the Magao Grottos. You know, over nearly 500 caves, painted caves at this site. Right here in the middle, you see the 9-story pavilion, which houses one of the giant Buddhas, the snow-clad sand dunes on top of the cliff face, and the river flowing in front of the site. So this gives you some sense of the place. And one of the main challenges of this exhibition for us was to try to convey this sense of the place in a museum exhibition. This is one of the caves, Cave 85, where the Getty Conservation Institute has developed a methodology for conservation. As I mentioned, there are nearly 500 painted caves, not all of them as beautifully preserved as this. But there were particular conservation challenges that we had to deal with. And as with all of our projects, we work in multidisciplinary teams. It's never one person who can do the work, and we always work in partnership with the authorities of the site. And we have a particularly close partnership with our colleagues at the Dunhuang Academy. Some of the other issues that we end up dealing with, these are more the management issues. This is more my area of expertise in terms of site management, but tourism has become an emerging problem at the Macau Grottos, as it has at cultural heritage sites throughout the world. And then at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Marcia to speak about the exhibition that was held about Dunhuang at the Getty Center.
The previous slide that Martha showed gives you some idea of the crowds that we had, and also we were working with Chinese text and English text in the exhibition as well, because we were really trying not to stumble on expressing concepts in English. So that was one of the ideas. But then we were trying to explain these complex works of art, their Buddhist content. We assumed that many people would not perhaps know the iconography, and so we did a lot of tours and tried to also present the idea that these caves, which we brought and had erected on the plaza, they were the first thing that visitors saw as they got off the tram coming up the hill to the Getty, that these were works of art done by very well-trained professional artists at the Dunhuang Academy, who also very admirably knew how to make them, tear them down, pack them, and then they would travel and they put them up again. So one of the things we did was make a video, which is on our website, of this process, because people were very interested in that idea. Martha, can we have the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
And then, radical shift, I like this transition to the gallery, where we were showing these major works of art. Most of them were from the, say, 700s to the 10th century. They were taken out of China by archaeologists and explorers, and these particular ones were brought to England, to the British Museum, to the British Library. On the left in the back, you see the Diamond Sutra shown in the case, part of it. And then we had paintings on silk, manuscripts in the cases, embroideries, and other paintings. So that was interesting also to talk about that the fact that these are not replicas. A lot of the Chinese audience who are used to replication and the idea that copying is legitimate in their culture, it references the mastery of that artwork. And so we did have to say, these are the real works of art that came from China. They're now in the British Library, the British Museum, the Musée Guimet, and the Bibliothèque Nationale. And yes, these are the real works of art that you are seeing in the gallery. So it was quite an interesting switch to make for visitors, and then to present that idea of artwork to them. I think they mostly did understand and get it eventually. Also, it was very different media. There were sketches in ink and pen, and then large-scale embroideries and paintings. So that swapping back and forth between manuscripts, prints on paper, silk, textiles, was also quite something. And we did have some wooden sculptures in the back gallery as well. And then Martha, do you want to keep talking about this?
No, unless I think that's fine in terms of the slides. I guess we can take those off now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we can get into a little bit more discussion, some more detail about some of the things we've introduced. One thing that I think is very, very interesting is that all of you are brought together, but you're really talking about radically different types of work, time periods, cultures, radically different in almost every way you can think of. But I think that what you're talking about and your experience can really speak to what the subject is, which is the collaboration and the cooperation between curators and conservators. I was thinking first of a question, whether any of you had any specific examples that you'd like to mention of curatorial and conservation work together, whether a challenge or something that worked out very well, a strategy that worked out well. And Martha, also I want to mention that, you talked about working with your colleagues in China, and I think although they may not be curators, there may be something in that could speak to our topic as well. So Margo, would you like to start off? Is there anything?
Yeah, I think that what Martha said, she mentioned partnership. And every time a conservator works, we enter a partnership. And that partnership is with the artist who originally created the work, whether that person is living, whether there's an estate, or it's an unknown artwork on the street. And the partnership is with the curators, but with our group of museum professionals. We really, especially in any museum, there is influence that you're going to get from the education department, from the visitor services, from your curators, and also our exhibition designers and art handlers. And it takes all of those people together to really bring the artwork to the public and make it a successful exhibition. Now, the other thing that Martha did discuss also was tourism and increasing crowds. And it is something that whether you're a museum of modern contemporary art or archaeological, but it's keeping your artwork safe. And it's the negotiation between the conservator and visitor services and the curators of what can we do? Do we have to not change the artwork, but how do we protect the artwork and how do we protect the visitors? And to be able to show artwork in ways that an artist might want, or how it was originally intended, say if it was in a temple or outside, we have to negotiate, come to agreements between all of the parties to really be able to negotiate that and to keep the artwork safe as well.
So what would be a specific example of that? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot to talk about anything that was, in any way contentious, but could you give an example of what happened with a particular work of art and how a resolution was reached in terms of what, either how to display it or how to conserve it, bringing in all of the people who are on the replication committee or individual conservators and others that you were working with?
Yeah, for example, right now we are working to create a next exhibition copy of a Felix Gonzalez Torres light string piece that's currently up in the stairwell of the Whitney. The piece consists of 16 strands of lights with 42 incandescent bulbs hanging from the ceiling. It sounds simple, but to create this, we need licensed electricians, we need the estate of the artist, the curators, conservators, art handlers, visitor services, and to create our next edition when, after the Whitney's next biennial, if we put this work up again, we have to go through every one of those parties to make sure that we stay true to the artist's original intention of the piece, to see what available materials there are, that is available materials that are mass produced, and also to keep the work within code. So there's electrical codes, and there is the visual look of the piece at all. So to get all this ready, it takes years, meetings, and several instances of different meetings to be able to get this artwork up.
And what happens if there, for example, in the replication committee, if there's strong disagreement, how do you come to a decision?
We don't disagree at the replication committee. There is one thing, it is a private, behind closed doors, and there is no hierarchy. We don't have things exit the replication committee until we have come to a resolution. So the committee was founded thinking that we would come to hard and fast rules and regulations of previous rulings, of examples, and with the Richard Serra, the prop object was the very first object. But until then, month after month, there are always things on the agenda to speak about. And certain things are rather quick. If there is an exhibition copy requested for loan, the Whitney would request that exhibition copy would be underneath the tombstone information underneath on the gallery wall. And that could just be quick and done, written down, finished. There's other things that may take years or months to really talk about. And it is a negotiation. So we don't, there really is no disagreements because we talk it out and come to the best decision for the artwork at the time, knowing that a decision that we would make in 2008 might absolutely change in 2017. So every instance is for a specific installation, a specific artist, and a specific project.
So you're sort of like a jury where you, in the end, come to a decision that everyone feels okay about and feels good about and wants to move forward with.
Yeah, and then keep records and notes on these to see how our decisions, if they do change over time, and we do expect them to change over time.
So I have a question from a viewer, and it relates to what you're talking about. The question is there standardized terminology for specific types of recreated artworks for different purposes? For example, replicas versus surrogates, exhibition copies, etc. And I think actually all of you could speak to this question, so whoever would like to jump in, please do.
Well, for the caves, yeah, we actually made a decision that we would call them replica caves and be absolutely standard so that people wouldn't wonder, was this that one or was there another one? And so we came together and then agreed and just kept editing ourselves on that.
But in terms of the way our partners in China approach the replica caves, I think it's important to point out that I mean, this is a very long tradition at the Dunhuang Academy. They've been doing it since the 1940s. And as Marcia indicated earlier, it's a long tradition in China, the idea of replication of art. But these replicas are exact copies of the caves as they are in their current condition. So there's no attempt to, restore them or bring them back to what they think may have been their original coloring or original look. So what you see in the replica caves, which are painted by artists, and they're to life size, are the caves as you would see them if you went into them today. So those are sort of the standards that the Dunhuang Academy sets for their caves.
And we
I'm sorry,
No,
go ahead, please.
Yeah. And that seemed perfectly reasonable. I think what Margo was saying is you have informed discussions. You trust your colleagues, whether they're in-house or out-house. And so I haven't experienced great disagreement when we're talking about replica caves, but then also when we're talking about conservation treatments. We usually have these interesting discussions, actually, bringing in lots of different voices. And so it isn't, I think, ever contentious.
And Martha, just going back to what you were talking about and what I mentioned a few minutes ago, relating to how you worked with the professionals in China and how that might, inform what we're talking about, work between curators and conservators and cooperation. I think, that was probably challenging in some ways, but you had a lot of success, clearly. Are there any specific examples of that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities. The more I hear my colleagues from museum context talk between the work we do and the work you have to do in a museum, even though the context seems so entirely different, because so much of it is about negotiation, but it's about having a shared vision. Where do you want to go in the end? It's about assessing, significance and condition and the whole management context before reaching a decision. And so we have found that, all of that has to go into a good partnership, but one of the things that really makes the biggest difference is establishing a relationship with our partners. And if you can have a good relationship that's based on trust and mutual understanding, that takes you just so far into the process of a good collaboration. And, sometimes you just can't achieve that. I think a lot of it has to do with personalities. There are cultural differences that are at play. But when you do have that strong relationship and you can build on it, it really makes all the difference in the world.
Marcia, I know that one of your focuses is the importance of collaboration and communication among curators and conservators and other professionals in your area. Could you talk a little bit more about what you do to encourage this, or what you think the circumstances are that would encourage this?
I think it's the direct communication and talking to people probably on a daily basis to establish this foundation of trust and respect for their ideas. And in terms of acquisitions and donations, so not even getting to exhibitions, the curators are working with the conservators all the time for problems when we're bringing in collections. There may be environmental problems or questions of originality. How much has this actually been treated in the past? Because in the world of rare books and prints or multiples, very often things have been done. Bindings have been removed, paper has been treated, prints have been taken out of albums. And so you have to be careful of thinking about something as an original. It's probably better to think about, I wonder what has gone on with this, and then deal with it in that way. The other thing that I really like to do is just work directly with conservators. So when we're taking a large collection in, we brought in our conservators, our registrars, and even catalogers for the Harold Seaman collection, which was in Switzerland, for the Knoedler Gallery Archive, which was in storage in New York and New Jersey. And so we were working in a maybe 4 or 5 person team to bring these enormous collections in. And so attention was being paid at those various levels of just interest. And then we would point things out to each other that a lot of times we might have missed ourselves. For instance, for the Zeman collection, I was fascinated by the contents, and I needed to look more at the spiders and the mold and the fungus and things like that. And then working with the packers and the shippers, I was just at the Detroit Institute of Art installing my own exhibition with one of our conservators. And if you do that, if you really work in tandem with people, I think that's the thing that fosters this collaborative relationship. And that's what we did for the Dunhuang exhibition, was work with Martha, Neville Agnew, our registrars. And that makes a good team. That's how it's built, I think.
And that exhibition, that exhibition really brought out both, looked at both, in quotes, what we would call the artworks, and then again, in quotes, what we would call the conservation process, right? So that was unusual in that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
We wanted to present them together and to talk about how conservation is right in there. Martha, I'll let you talk about it.
I mean, that was really one of the great challenges of the exhibition, but also I think we all had a very interesting time with that aspect of it, because it was trying to bring together the artifacts that Marcia mentioned, where there were 43 of them scattered around the world that originally came from the site but were no longer there, and then recreate the context for those artifacts. Where was this place that they came from? And that was done in part through having the 3 replica caves there to give a sense of these cave temples, and then to have videos and the 3D immersive experience, all ways in which people could experience, the site itself. And then a major overlay on top of all that was to bring in the conservation message. What does it mean to conserve a site like that? What is wall paintings conservation? What is the process that one goes through? And what are the other threats and issues that affect a major cultural heritage site, such as tourism or flooding, or things that people don't naturally tend to even think about when they're within a museum context. So that was really an interesting part of the exhibition. I think that we ultimately were, very successful at doing, and I think it creates a good model for that type of exhibition in the future.
I think it also points out that there are so many different, once again, so many different situations in which one might look at this, location, type of work, etc. So I think that's really important, obviously, to look at your situation first, probably, and you probably must look at your situation first. You don't have a choice. I just wanted to encourage everyone in the audience, please feel free to send in your questions, and we'll try to get to them and get them answered. You can just go to the box at the right of your screen to do that, and then we'll see them. Also, if any of you have questions for one another, or any of the panelists have questions for one another, or anything you'd like to discuss in more depth, please do jump in.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Margo about the Replication Committee and the idea that it operates in confidence, that it's not a public forum, and how does that change the way you talk with one another as within your different disciplines?
It's actually very open, and knowing that it doesn't even go beyond the doors of the Replication Committee, you can think of things, nothing is off limits, time, money, politics, so that opens things up, and to things that you might not say publicly or are not sure about, and you have also a opportunity to make mistakes, try things, before you would present them outside your committee.
Is there a record that's kept of, though, the deliberations, or?
There is. We keep, there are notes from every single meeting, there are guest speakers, there are summaries of projects, and also agendas that have been kept since 2008. Mm-hmm.
Margo, also, I know that one of your special interests is ethics in relation to conservation treatment. How does that come into play when you're in discussion either in the replication committee or with individual curators? It must, I imagine, come into play quite a lot.
It does. With modern and contemporary art, each treatment will be dictated by the artist, by their the artist's works, their writings, interviews, and research and art historical expertise of that artist. So each treatment would be different. And sometimes we have artists that would want to recreate the work, and we would discuss that within the replication committee. Is this within the ethics of this artist's body of work? Should we clean this work? How far do we clean it? I don't want to make it seem as if we are just discussing only treatment, but it is showing a work two places at once. Can we do that ethically? If an artist asks us, what are the legal ramifications of that? What's copyright? And all of the guidelines that do aid us in treating an artwork, in replicating, or even loaning an artwork is extremely interesting, and it is sparks great conversations between our departments that I think we think of then throughout our work at the museum, and really not just about replication, but just how we treat artworks in general.
Is there, could you suggest one or two sources that are go-to sources for those types of discussions?
They are few. If you look in, I would think, Getty AATA or BCIN in conservation literature, there are not a ton of published articles. It's because sometimes legally these are contentious issues. They are private between museums, and they are not, one certain thing is really cannot hold for all works of art. So it isn't, there are not a ton of resources yet, but in the replication committee we are working to put forth some of the decisions that historically the replication has made that we could publish, share with other museums, and also dating conventions is one thing that we're working on right now. When do we redate something? When does it have a dash or a slash or a conserved or a refabricated or an exhibition copy next to it? All of those small words, commas, and numbers are very important to art historians, to conservators, and artists. So we are currently going through that, but there aren't, it's not out yet.
Okay, well, I have a few questions from the audience, and time is going by, so I'm going to see if we can get to some more of those. This is a question related to Dunhuang. Did you anticipate with the Dunhuang exhibition having to help the visitors make the transition from replicas to authentic objects? And how did that affect curatorial, conservation, and design decisions?
Okay. I think that's probably a question for Marcia, but she seems to have gone.
I think we lost Marcia. Hopefully we'll get her back. Martha, can you speak at all to that, or should we wait till Marcia comes back for that one?
Sure, I can try to speak to it.
I know.
Oh, no, is she back? No. Okay. What I think is, I think the question for Marcia, but she seems to have gone.
I think we lost Marcia. Hopefully we'll get her back. Martha, can you speak at all to that, or should we wait till Marcia comes back for that one?
She's back? No. Okay. Is she back? No. Okay. obviously the replicas
No, I can
people
hear you.
were.
I think I'm coming.
Oh, you
Oh,
can.
good. Oh, there you are,
Oh, there
Marcia.
you are.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead, Marcia.
Marcia, we can see you. Oops, we can't hear
No,
you.
I can't see you, but it's fine.
Okay, go ahead. Would you like me to read the question again, or did you hear it?
I heard it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Well, Martha, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. All right. I think it was more of a question for you, but I'll certainly give it a spin. The replica caves themselves, I think people were often confused about them. Some people even thinking that we had brought the caves to the Getty, which was obviously rather absurd. But I think it indicates the fact that people have this level of confusion about authentic artifacts, places, and replicas. And then, of course, there's the whole notion of fakes, which is where we really wanted to stay away from. Once people actually went into the replica caves and saw them, because they are so beautifully executed, they were really impressed. Now, then making the connection between that and authentic objects, as Marcia was saying earlier, that sometimes there was confusion in people's mind about whether the objects themselves were replicated, and of course they were not. The fact that they're in a gallery museum setting, I think for the most part made most people understand that these were original objects in cases, and they have all of the accoutrements of a gallery or a museum. So there probably was some confusion on the part of people, but I think for the most part people understood when they were transitioning from a replica, something that was replicated, to actually original artifacts in the museum. So I think context actually is important.
Yes, yes. We have another question from a conservator, which I think builds on this. As a conservator, I'm always surprised at how little training curators have in the materials and construction of the art that they study. Can you think of ways that the collaboration can be successful outside the range of replication or exhibition? What can conservators do to help curators understand materials better?
I think that's probably true. Go ahead. Well, Margo, go ahead.
I think that is changing. I think that there are many young curators out there with a passion for objects, that the art history PhD programs are now teaching art history in front of art, and I do think it's changing.
I know that my training in that area was done with people who worked hands-on with the paper to figure out what kind of paper it was. It gets much harder in 20th century collections in terms of, just Duchamp boxes or George Machunas flux kits and things like that. There's such a range of media in the 20th century, and that, I think, benefits from seminars that art history professors do with collections and talking about what those materials are. It's certainly an interesting area when working with photographic techniques and understanding what those are. And I think it's much more of something that you have to do working with the materials in front of you and talking about it. And as Margo said, I think there is more training. There wasn't a lot in art history. When I was studying art history, there actually was more in the field of history of the book in terms of paper making, and binding, and certainly techniques.
I think we lost Marcia, but hopefully she'll come back. Do either of you, Margo or Martha, want to expand on that a little bit more? I mean, I know certainly as a curator, I feel that it's very important to be in touch with the objects themselves. But I've also experienced situations in which curators or other professionals almost have a fear of objects, and they don't really know how to approach them, whether intellectually or physically. Is that something that you've encountered and perhaps been able to overcome in some way?
One thing as conservators is having curators approach you and looking at an artwork like you never would in a gallery. An artwork in a crate, upside down, face down, disassembled, and working with curators and conservators, using their expertise to better understand the object. And I am not saying that every curator needs to have an absolute understanding of every single 20th century material and process, but by working and reaching out to your colleagues who may have better understanding, then you could learn more about the object.
Yeah, an analogy in my field is our relationship with, let's say, I work a lot on archaeological sites, on ancient sites, so the relationship between the conservator and the archaeologist, which can be very fraught at times. But increasingly, the archaeologist wants to understand the materials. They're interested in the sort of information that a conservator can bring to their understanding of the place or the objects that they're excavating. So, and I think the development of so many interesting new analytical techniques for exploring materials has also lends itself to more interest on the part of, you know, the curator or the archaeologist in my analogy.
So, someone from our viewers suggests, you know, that internship opportunities for students, you know, in museums certainly makes it possible for them to come into contact with curators and conservators and other museum professionals, which of course is very important. And also, this person brought up something that I think is maybe of interest to AAMC members in general and perhaps some members of our viewers today, which is, do you have any suggestions, any of you, for what to do if you're at a museum that does not have a conservator on staff? Where to go for resources, what your best suggestions would be in terms of interacting with curators, working with curators on specific projects, bringing specific issues to curators, where to find people to speak with, etc.
Martha, do you want to go first or do you want me to answer first? I guess I'll jump in for lack of anything else. First of all, not having a conservator, there's no replacement for a conservator. There's
right.
nothing you can do. So you should hire one.
If you can't hire one, where can you find, what would you do to find one?
You can find conservators through the Institute, the American Institute for Conservation website. There is a Find a Conservator tool where you can look at your location. You can also look at your specialty, depending if you need someone who is in books, paper, textiles, sculpture, wooden artifacts, furniture, or time-based media. You can figure out where you are, and also asking people. I have really found that museum professionals, registrars, know conservators from all over the place and are your best your best bet is to ask for a referral and to then talk to conservators to figure out what you can do for your location, for your project, and your budget. It ranges all over the place. There's AIC, the American Institute for Conservation, has angels projects that conservators will get together and volunteer their time. There are schools that you could see if you could get things fixed by, or there's also fundraising and bringing awareness of the importance that no one can fix your artworks but conservators. Bringing that awareness up, having that to make sure that it has to be in the line item, it has to be in your budget, and there's no way around it.
Now, does the Getty Conservation Institute, I know you, for the most part, take on larger projects and on-site projects, but do you ever consult with individual museums on conservation?
No. We tend to take on the bigger conceptual projects that will then have ramifications for people in museums or people on sites. And again, we're not the ones that deal with the Getty Museum or the Getty Research Institute on conservation. They have their own conservators. Mm-hmm. So we tend to be more research oriented in terms of sites or projects that relate to objects, like maybe the environment of the objects or the lighting issues in museums, that sort of thing.
Just to say that we do occasionally bring interesting problems to the scientists at the GCI because we have things we simply don't know, and we have 4 or 5 conservators at the Research Institute, and then departments at the museum have them, and sometimes we just come upon things which don't have easy answers, and so it is completely great to bring them to the specialists at the GCI, and sometimes it evolves into a very interesting project or initiative.
Yeah, so there are those sorts of internal collaborations that go on within our, our family of the Getty.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate that there are, a good number of museums that don't have conservators on staff, and I think, they really lose a lot by not having that voice there every day. But they do, they I think do want to go out into the world and see where they can bring people in and discuss specific issues and raise awareness within the institution and their audience and their neighborhood.
I think that the conservation sections of the Cave Temples show were some of the ones that I saw people watching, looking at the monitors, looking at the paint samples that we showed. And so I think it's something that people have great interest in.
Mm-hmm.
So, believe it or not, we're at the end of our session. And sorry we can't go on longer because I think there's a lot to discuss on this topic. But I really want to thank all of you, the panelists, very much, and also thank everyone for tuning in. A recording of this webinar will be available on the AAMC website shortly, and I just wanted to repeat again, the AAMC web address is www.artcurators.org. Thank you so much, everyone, and I look forward to talking again.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you.